The gym smelled like sweat and rubber mats, mixed with the sharp scent of cleaning solution that never quite masked the underlying odors of hard training. Marcus Williams wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he watched the other fighters warm up around him. At 22, he was still trying to prove himself in this world of mixed martial arts, where respect came only through blood, sweat, and the ability to stay standing when everything in your body screamed to quit. The Iron Forge gym wasn't the fanciest place in Detroit. The equipment was old but functional. The walls were painted a faded blue that had seen better days, and the lighting cast harsh shadows across the training mats. But it was home to some of the toughest fighters in the city, and Marcus had been coming here for 3 years, slowly working his way up from complete beginner to someone who could hold his own in the ring. "Williams, get over here." Coach Thompson's voice cut through the noise of heavy bags being pounded and feet shuffling across mats. Marcus jogged over to where the older man stood, his weathered face showing the wear of 30 years in combat sports. Thompson had been a professional boxer back in the day, though he never talked much about his career. What mattered was that he knew how to train fighters, and he had taken Marcus under his wing when a young man first walked through the doors. "You're sparring with Rivera today," Thompson said, nodding toward a compact, muscular fighter who was shadowboxing near the cage. Diego Rivera was 28, a veteran of 12 professional fights with a record that spoke of both skill and toughness. He wasn't the biggest guy in the gym, standing only 5'8", but he moved with the fluid precision of someone who had been fighting since childhood. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Rivera was several levels above him in terms of experience and skill. While Marcus had only had 2 amateur fights, both of which he had lost by decision, Rivera was being groomed for a shot at a regional title. The gap in their abilities was significant, but Thompson believed in throwing his students into deep water to see if they could swim. "Keep your hands up, move your feet, and don't try to be a hero," Thompson instructed. "This is about learning, not winning." Rivera's been doing this since he was 12. Watch how he moves, how he sets up his attacks. You can learn more in 1 round with him than in 10 rounds with someone at your level. Marcus nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. He had always been athletic, playing football in high school before discovering mixed martial arts in college. At 6 feet tall, with a lean, muscular build, he had the physical tools to potentially succeed in the sport. What he lacked was the years of technical refinement that separated good fighters from great ones. The gym was busier than usual that evening. Word had gotten around that there would be some serious sparring sessions, and several of the area's better fighters had shown up to either participate or watch. Among them was someone Marcus hadn't seen before, a quiet man in his early 30s who sat on the bleachers near the cage, observing everything with intense, calculating eyes. The stranger was built like a compact machine, not overly large, but carrying himself with the kind of controlled alertness that suggested serious training. His hair was cut short in military fashion, and there was something about the way he positioned himself, always with clear sight lines to exits, always ready to move, that set him apart from the typical gym crowd. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and black shorts, nothing that would draw attention, but Marcus found his gaze drifting to the man periodically as he prepared for his sparring session. "Who's the new guy?" Marcus asked Thompson as they wrapped his hands. Thompson glanced over at the bleachers and shrugged. Said his name was Jake. Military background, I think. Asked if he could watch some of the training. Seems harmless enough. The coach finished with the hand wraps and began helping Marcus into his gloves. "Don't worry about the audience. Focus on Rivera." As Marcus made his final preparations, Rivera approached with a slight smile. Despite being the more experienced fighter, Diego was known for being respectful and professional in training. He understood that sparring was about mutual improvement, not about dominating less skilled partners. "Ready to work, Marcus?" Rivera asked, extending his gloves for a touch. "Let's have a good session." The 2 fighters entered the octagonal cage that dominated the center of the gym. The chain-link walls rose 8 feet high, topped with padding to prevent injuries during wild scrambles. The mat beneath their feet was firm but had enough give to absorb the impact of takedowns and falls. This was where dreams were made and broken where fighters discovered what they were truly made of when stripped of all pretense and faced with pure physical and mental challenges. Thompson called them to the center of the cage. 5-minute rounds, 1-minute rest between. I want clean technique, controlled aggression. This is training, not warfare. Touch gloves, and let's see what you've both learned. Marcus and Rivera touched gloves and backed away to opposite sides of the cage. The familiar pre-fight mixture of excitement and nervousness coursed through Marcus's veins. He had been working on his boxing for months, trying to develop the kind of crisp combinations that could set up his wrestling attacks. Rivera was known for his submission skills, having finished 6 of his 12 professional victories by tap-out, so Marcus knew he would need to be extremely careful if the fight went to the ground. The timer started, and both fighters began circling each other cautiously. Rivera moved with the smooth footwork of someone who had internalized the fundamentals years ago. His hands stayed in perfect position, his weight balanced, and ready to explode in any direction. Marcus tried to mimic the same disciplined approach, but he could feel the tension in his shoulders, the slight stiffness that came from overthinking his movements. Rivera threw the first meaningful strike, a quick jab that snapped out and back before Marcus could react. It didn't land cleanly, but it served notice that the veteran was ready to engage. Marcus responded with a jab of his own, which Rivera slipped easily to the side, while countering with a short right hand that caught Marcus on the temple. The shot wasn't hard enough to hurt, but it demonstrated the difference in their timing and accuracy. Rivera seemed to be operating on a different frequency, seeing openings and opportunities that Marcus was only beginning to recognize. Every movement was economical and purposeful, while Marcus found himself throwing strikes that were technically sound but lacking the subtle angles and timing that made them truly effective. 2 minutes into the round, Rivera began to increase the pressure. He started throwing combinations instead of single strikes, forcing Marcus to defend instead of looking for his own offense. A left hook to the body folded Marcus slightly, and Rivera immediately followed with an uppercut that Marcus barely avoided by jerking his head back. Marcus tried to change the dynamic by shooting for a takedown, using his wrestling background to try to get the fight to the ground where he felt more comfortable. But Rivera had excellent takedown defense, sprawling his legs back and using an underhook to maintain his balance. As Marcus struggled to complete the takedown, Rivera began looking for a guillotine choke, wrapping his arm around Marcus's neck as the younger fighter's head was exposed. This was the moment that would change everything. Marcus felt Rivera's arm slide under his chin, the forearm beginning to press against his throat. In a perfectly controlled training environment, this would be the point where he would either escape the attempt or tap out to reset and continue sparring. But something went wrong with the positioning, or perhaps Rivera applied more pressure than he intended, or maybe Marcus's neck was positioned at just the wrong angle. The choke came on faster and tighter than either fighter expected. Instead of the gradual pressure that would give Marcus time to defend or submit, Rivera's forearm compressed against his windpipe with sudden, overwhelming force. Marcus immediately recognized that this wasn't a normal blood choke that would put him to sleep gradually. This was crushing his airway, cutting off his ability to breathe entirely. Panic began to set in as Marcus realized he couldn't breathe and couldn't speak to tap out verbally. He tried to tap Rivera's arms, the universal signal of submission in combat sports, but Rivera was focused on maintaining the position and didn't feel the taps clearly. The positioning made it difficult for Marcus to reach Rivera's body to tap in an obvious way, and his increasingly desperate movements looked like normal, struggling to escape the hold. Thompson was watching from outside the cage, but the angle made it difficult to see exactly what was happening. From his perspective, it looked like a normal grappling exchange with Rivera working for submission and Marcus defending. The coach had seen thousands of such exchanges over the years, and nothing initially appeared out of the ordinary. Marcus's vision began to narrow as his brain was deprived of oxygen. The edges of his sight turned gray, and he could feel his strength beginning to fade. His tapping became more frantic, but Rivera still couldn't feel it clearly enough to recognize it as a submission. The veteran fighter was concentrating on maintaining the position and applying steady pressure, not realizing that something had gone drastically wrong. In the bleachers, Jake had been watching the sparring with professional interest. His background had taught him to recognize when situations were moving from controlled to dangerous, and something about this exchange immediately caught his attention. While everyone else saw a normal training drill, Jake's trained, I picked up on the subtle signs that Marcus was in real distress. The way Marcus's movements had changed from purposeful defense to increasingly desperate thrashing was the first indicator. His legs, which had been working to improve position and create leverage, were now kicking frantically with no tactical purpose. His hands, which should have been working to break the grip or create space, were instead engaged in the kind of panicked flailing that suggested genuine fear. Jake stood up from the bleachers, his movement smooth but urgent. He had seen enough combat to know the difference between control training and life-threatening situations. While sparring accidents were relatively rare, they did happen, and the difference between proper intervention and tragic outcomes was often measured in seconds. "Hey," Jake called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen without question. "Something's wrong." Thompson looked over, initially annoyed at the interruption. Spectators weren't supposed to interfere with training, and he was about to tell the newcomer to be quiet when he saw the expression on Jake's face. There was no confusion or uncertainty there, just the calm urgency of someone who had seen enough emergency situations to recognize when immediate action was required. Jake was already moving toward the cage as he spoke. "The kid's not breathing right. Look at his color." Thompson's attention snapped back to the fighters, and he immediately saw what Jake was talking about. Marcus's face was beginning to change color, taking on the dusky appearance that indicated oxygen deprivation. His movements had become uncoordinated and increasingly weak, and there was something about his posture that suggested genuine distress rather than normal submission defense. "Rivera, stop!" Thompson shouted, moving toward the cage door. But Rivera, focused on maintaining the submission and wearing noise-canceling headphones during training, didn't hear the instruction clearly. He continued to hold the position, thinking he was giving Marcus a chance to work his way out of the hold as they had done countless times before in training. Jake reached the cage first, his movements efficient and purposeful. Without hesitation, he began climbing the chain-link wall, moving with the kind of speed and coordination that suggested extensive physical training. Thompson was fumbling with the cage door, trying to find the latch in his urgency, but Jake had already reached the top of the 8-foot barrier and was dropping down onto the mat inside. The situation was now clearly critical. Marcus's struggling had become even weaker, his taps against Rivera's arms barely noticeable even to someone who was looking for them. His face was now distinctly discolored, and his eyes were beginning to lose focus. What had started as a routine training exercise was rapidly becoming a medical emergency. Jake landed inside the cage and immediately moved toward the fighters. Rivera, finally, sensing that something was wrong, but not yet understanding the full scope of the problem, looked up to see a stranger approaching him with obvious intent to intervene. Confusion crossed his face as he tried to process what was happening and why someone had entered the cage during sparring. "Let go of him, now," Jake commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. There was no aggression in his manner, but there was absolute certainty and authority that cut through Rivera's confusion. Rivera, trained to respond to clear commands from authority figures, immediately released the hold. Marcus collapsed to the mat, his body going limp as the pressure on his windpipe was finally relieved. The sudden release allowed air to rush back into his lungs, but he was barely conscious and his breathing was labored and irregular. Jake immediately dropped to his knees beside Marcus, his hands moving to check pulse and breathing with the practiced efficiency of someone with extensive medical training. His fingers found the pulse point on Marcus's neck, checking the strength and regularity of his heartbeat while observing the rise and fall of his chest. Give me some water and call 911, Jake instructed Thompson, who had finally gotten the cage door open and was standing nearby in shock. He's breathing, but not well. We need to make sure his airway isn't damaged. The gym had gone completely quiet, the usual sounds of training replaced by the tense silence that follows when everyone realizes something serious has just happened. Other fighters gathered around the cage, their faces showing the mixture of concern and fascination that comes with witnessing a real emergency in a place where controlled violence is the norm. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident as he tried to understand what had happened and why he was lying on the mat with a stranger leaning over him. His throat felt raw and damaged, and when he tried to speak, only a weak croak emerged. Jake placed a gentle but firm hand on his chest, preventing him from trying to sit up too quickly. "Stay down for a minute," Jake said calmly. "You just had your air cut off. Let's make sure everything's working properly before you try to move around." Rivera stood a few feet away, his face showing the horror of someone who had just realized he had come very close to seriously injuring a training partner. In combat sports, fighters develop an almost sacred trust with their sparring partners, knowing that they are putting their safety in each other's hands every time they step into the cage or ring. The thought that he had violated that trust, even unintentionally, was devastating. "Marcus, I'm so sorry, man," Rivera said, his voice shaking. "I didn't realize. I couldn't feel you tapping. Are you okay?" Marcus tried to respond, but could only manage a weak nod. His throat felt like it had been crushed, and swallowing was painful. The fear was beginning to set in as he realized how close he had come to a serious injury, or potentially something much worse. Jake continued his assessment, checking Marcus's pupils with a small flashlight he had produced from somewhere, testing his responses to simple commands, and monitoring his breathing. His movements were efficient and professional, suggesting medical training that went well beyond basic first aid. Pupils are equal and reactive. Breathing is improving. Pulse is strong, Jake reported to Thompson, who was hovering nearby with obvious anxiety. "He should go to the hospital to get checked out, but I don't think there's any permanent damage. Someone needs to examine his throat and make sure the cartilage wasn't damaged." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, the EMTs taking over Marcus's care and preparing him for transport to the nearest emergency room. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Marcus managed to catch Jake's eye and mouth "thank you," his voice still too damaged for clear speech. Jake simply nodded, stepping back to allow the medical professionals to do their work. As the ambulance pulled away, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in for everyone present. Without Jake's quick recognition of the problem and immediate intervention, the evening could have ended very differently. Thompson approached Jake as the gym slowly began to return to normal activity, though the energy was subdued and thoughtful rather than the usual intense focus of serious training. "I don't know who you are or what your background is," the coach said, "but you just saved that kid's life. How did you know what was happening when the rest of us didn't see it?" Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how much to share. When he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "I've seen enough emergency situations to recognize when something's going wrong. The important thing is that he's going to be okay." There is obviously more to the story, but Jake's manner suggested he wasn't inclined to elaborate. Thompson nodded, understanding that some people preferred to keep their backgrounds private, especially when those backgrounds involved skills that were acquired in places most people would never see. "Well, whoever you are, you're welcome here anytime," Thompson said. "And if you're ever interested in training, we could use someone with your kind of awareness and quick thinking." Jake looked around the gym, taking in the equipment, the other fighters, and the general atmosphere of serious, dedicated training. There was something appealing about the idea of having a place to work out and maintain his skills in a civilian environment. "I might take you up on that," he said finally. "But right now, I think I'll head to the hospital and make sure the kid is really okay." As Jake collected his jacket and prepared to leave, several of the other fighters approached him, curious about his background and grateful for his intervention. But Jake deflected their questions with polite but firm responses, maintaining the quiet privacy that seemed to be his natural state. Rivera was still standing near the cage, staring at the spot where Marcus had collapsed. The weight of what had almost happened was clearly affecting him deeply, and Jake stopped beside him before leaving. "It wasn't your fault," Jake said quietly. "These things happen in combat sports. The position was wrong, the angle was off, maybe he couldn't tap properly. You couldn't have known. What matters is that he's going to be fine." Rivera looked at him with grateful eyes. "How do you know about this stuff? Are you a fighter?" Jake was quiet for a moment, then simply said, "I've been in a few fights." The understatement was obvious to anyone who had watched him move and react during the crisis, but Rivera didn't push for more details. As Jake left the gym and headed toward his truck in the parking lot, he reflected on how quickly a normal evening had turned into a potential tragedy. The transition from civilian life to emergency response had been automatic and seamless, drawing on skills and training that were never far from the surface despite his efforts to live quietly. He started his truck and began driving toward the hospital, wanted to make sure Marcus was truly okay before considering the evening finished. Behind him, the Iron Forge gym was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, but everyone present would remember this night and the quiet stranger who had appeared when he was needed most. The incident would become part of gym lore, the kind of story that gets told to new members as an illustration of both the dangers and the brotherhood that exists within the fighting community. But for now, it was simply an evening that had reminded everyone present that the difference between sport and tragedy can sometimes be measured in seconds, and that having the right person in the right place at the right moment can make all the difference in the world. The emergency room at Detroit General Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that characterized trauma centers in major cities. Fluorescent lights cast harsh white light over everything, making the already sterile environment feel even more clinical and impersonal. Marcus Williams sat on an examination bed, a thin hospital gown replacing his training clothes, while Dr. Sarachun carefully examined his throat with a small light and what looked like a tiny camera. "Can you say off for me?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice professional but kind. She was a small woman with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her manner suggested someone who had seen every possible type of injury that could result from contact sports. Marcus complied, though the sound that emerged was rough and painful. His throat felt like someone had taken sandpaper to the inside of his windpipe, and swallowing was still difficult hours after the incident. The fear that had initially accompanied his inability to breathe had been replaced by a deep soreness and the unsettling awareness of just how vulnerable the human neck really was. The good news is that there doesn't appear to be any serious structural damage, Dr. Chen said as she finished her examination. No fractures to the hyoid bone or damage to the larynx. You have significant soft tissue swelling and some bruising to the trachea, but that should heal on its own over the next week or two. She sat down on a rolling stool and made some notes on her tablet before looking back at Marcus. "You're very lucky. Another 30 seconds, and we might be having a very different conversation." Whoever recognized what was happening and intervened probably saved your life. Marcus nodded carefully, trying not to aggravate his injured throat. The memory of those terrifying moments when he couldn't breathe was still vivid, and he found himself unconsciously touching his neck where Rivera's arm had been wrapped around it. The physical discomfort was manageable, but the psychological impact of coming so close to serious injury was harder to process. "The man who helped me," Marcus managed to croak out, "is he still here?" Dr. Chin shook her head. "He left about an hour ago, after we assured him that you were going to be fine. He seemed to know quite a bit about medical emergencies. Military background, I guess, based on how he handled the situation and the way he communicated with our EMTs." A nurse entered the room carrying a small cup of ice chips and a prescription bottle. "For the throat," she explained, offering Marcus the ice. "And these are anti-inflammatory pills to help with the swelling. You should be able to go home in another hour or so, but no training for at least 2 weeks. Your throat needs time to heal properly." as Marcus slowly sucked on the ice chips, feeling the cool relief they provided. His mind kept returning to the stranger who had intervened. There had been something about the man's calm competence and immediate recognition of danger that set him apart from everyone else in the gym. While experienced fighters and coaches had initially seen a normal training situation, Jake had immediately identified a life-threatening emergency. Dr. Chin finished her notes and stood up. I want to see you back here in a week to check on the healing. And Marcus? She paused at the door. Consider yourself incredibly fortunate. In 30 years of emergency medicine, I've seen too many young athletes who weren't as lucky as you were tonight. After she left, Marcus was alone with his thoughts and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. The adrenaline that had carried him through the initial emergency was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained and reflective. He had always known that mixed martial arts carried risks, but those risks had always seemed abstract and distant. Tonight, they had become very real and very immediate. His phone buzzed with a text message from Thompson. How are you feeling? Diego is beside himself with worry. Wants to know if he can visit. Marcus typed back carefully, his fingers still slightly shaky. Tell him I'm okay. Not his fault. These things happen. But even as he wrote those words, Marcus found himself questioning whether he wanted to continue with the sport. The memory of that helpless panic, of being unable to breathe or call for help, was not something that would fade quickly. Combat sports required a certain level of trust in training partners and confidence in one's ability to handle dangerous situations. Tonight had shaken both. His phone rang, and he saw his mother's number on the display. Word had obviously gotten back to his family about the incident, probably through Thompson, who had emergency contact information for all his fighters. Marcus accepted the call, knowing that his damaged voice would immediately worry her. Marcus? Oh, honey, are you all right? Coach Thompson called and said there was an accident at the gym. His mother's voice carried the mixture of love and anxiety that had characterized a relationship with his fighting career from the beginning. I'm okay, Mom, Marcus managed to say, though his voice was still weak and raspy. Just a training accident. I'll be home in a couple hours. I'm coming to get you, she said immediately. You shouldn't be driving after something like this. Marcus wanted to argue, to maintain some independence and dignity in the situation, but he realized she was probably right. His hands were still slightly shaky, and his concentration wasn't what it should be for driving in city traffic. Okay, he agreed. I'm at Detroit General, Emergency Department. After ending the call, Marcus leaned back against the hospital bed and closed his eyes. The events of the evening played through his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He kept coming back to those crucial moments when Jake had recognized the danger and taken immediate action. Without that intervention, Marcus knew he would likely not be lying in a hospital bed with a sore throat and bruised ego. He would probably not be lying anywhere at all. The door opened again, and Marcus looked up expecting to see another nurse or doctor. Instead, Jake stood in the doorway, still wearing the same gray t-shirt and black shorts from the gym, though he now carried a small bouquet of flowers and what appeared to be a get-well card. Hope you don't mind a visit, Jake said, his voice carrying the same calm authority Marcus remembered from the crisis. Wanted to make sure you were really okay before I headed home. Marcus tried to sit up straighter, wincing slightly as the movement aggravated his throat. Please come in. I was hoping I'd get a chance to thank you properly. Jake entered the room and set the flowers and card on the bedside table. Up close and in better light, Marcus could see more details about the man who had saved him. His build was compact, but obviously powerful, with the kind of functional muscle that came from serious training rather than casual gym work. His eyes were alert and constantly scanning, taking in details about the room, the equipment, and Marcus's condition with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained in tactical assessment. How are you feeling? Jake asked, taking a seat in the visitor's chair beside the bed. Sore, scared, grateful, Marcus admitted. The doctor says there's no permanent damage, but it's going to take some time to heal. More importantly, she says I'm lucky to be alive. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Close calls have a way of putting things in perspective. How long have you been training? About 3 years, Marcus replied. Started in college after I quit football. I thought I wanted to be a professional fighter, but now... He trailed off, uncertainty evident in his voice. Having second thoughts, Marcus looked out the hospital room window at the lights of the city beyond. I keep thinking about those moments when I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything to help myself. It was the most helpless I've ever felt in my life. I'm not sure I can get back in there knowing that could happen again. Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but direct. Fear is a normal response to trauma. The question isn't whether you'll feel afraid. It's how you choose to deal with that fear. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Marcus asked, where you thought you might die. Jake's expression grew more serious, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something deeper behind his calm exterior. A few times, different circumstances, but the same feeling of helplessness and fear. The important thing to remember is that survival often depends on preparation, awareness, and having people around you who know what they're doing. What's your background? Marcus asked directly. I mean, you knew exactly what was happening when everyone else thought it was just normal sparring. You moved like someone with serious training, and the way you handled the whole situation. Jake hesitated, clearly considering how much to reveal. Military, he said finally. Navy SEALs. Did 4 tours overseas before transitioning to civilian life about 2 years ago. The revelation explained everything Marcus had observed about Jake's demeanor and capabilities. Navy SEALs represented the elite of military special operations, trained to handle the most dangerous and complex missions in environments where failure meant death. The calm competence Jake had displayed during the crisis was the product of years of training in life-or-death situations. 4 tours, Marcus repeated. That's a lot of combat experience. It was enough, Jake said simply, his tone suggesting he didn't particularly want to elaborate on his military service. The point is that dangerous situations are manageable when you have the right training and the right people around you. What happened tonight was an accident, but it also highlighted some safety issues that could be addressed. Marcus was intrigued despite his current aversion to thinking about returning to fighting. What kind of safety issues? Better communication protocols during sparring, clearer visual supervision from coaches, maybe some basic emergency medical training for everyone in the gym, Jake replied. Simple things that could prevent accidents or at least ensure faster response when things go wrong. The door opened and Marcus's mother entered, her face showing the worry that had been building during her drive to the hospital. Linda Williams was a small, energetic woman in her 50s who had always supported her son's athletic pursuits while maintaining a healthy concern for his safety. "Oh, honey," she said, moving quickly to Marcus's bedside and gently touching his face. "You look terrible. How are you feeling?" "I'm okay, Mom," Marcus assured her, though his voice was still noticeably weak. "This is Jake, the man who helped me at the gym." Linda turned to Jake with an expression of profound gratitude. "You saved my son's life," she said simply. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Jake stood up and extended his hand. "Just glad I was in the right place at the right time, ma'am. Marcus is tough. He's going to be fine. Are you a doctor?" Linda asked, noting the professional way Jake had been discussing Marcus's condition. "No, ma'am. Just some military medical training. Your son got excellent care from the real doctors here." Linda studied Jake with the sharp eyes of a mother, trying to assess whether this man was worthy of her trust and gratitude. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because her expression softened and she smiled genuinely for the first time since entering the room. "Well, you're welcome in our home anytime," she said. "I mean that. Anyone who would risk himself to help my son is family, as far as I'm concerned." Jake appeared slightly uncomfortable with the emotional intensity of her gratitude, but he accepted it gracefully. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind." Dr. Chun returned with Marcus's discharge papers and final instructions. After reviewing the medication schedule and follow-up appointments, she cleared him to go home with his mother. As Marcus slowly got dressed in his gym clothes, which had been returned to him in a hospital bag, Jake prepared to leave. "I want to see you back at the gym when you're clear to train again," Jake said as Marcus finished putting on his shoes. Not necessarily to fight, but to learn. There are things you can work on that will make you safer and more aware in future training situations. Marcus looked up, surprised by the offer. You be willing to train with me? Train you, not with you. Jake corrected with a slight smile. There's a difference. I'm not looking to compete or prove anything, but I think I could teach you some things that might be useful. What kind of things? Situational awareness, emergency protocols, how to communicate more effectively during sparring. Basic self-preservation skills that go beyond just fighting techniques. The offer was intriguing, especially coming from someone with Jake's obvious expertise and the demonstrated ability to remain calm under pressure. Marcus found himself nodding before he had fully processed the decision. Okay, he said, when I'm clear to train again, I like to learn whatever you're willing to teach. Jake stood up and shook Marcus's hand. Good. Take care of yourself and don't rush the recovery. Your throat needs time to heal properly. As Jake left the hospital room, Linda helped Marcus gather his belongings and prepare for the trip home. The drive through the city was quiet, both mother and son lost in their own thoughts about how quickly a normal evening had turned into a brush with disaster. I like him, Linda said finally, as they stopped at a red light. That Jake. There's something solid about him. Trustworthy. Marcus nodded, thinking about the calm authority Jake had displayed throughout the crisis and its aftermath. He's a Navy SEAL. 4 tours of combat duty. Linda's eyebrows rose. That explains a lot. Those men see things most of us never will. The fact that he was there tonight, with his training and experience. She shook her head. Sometimes I think there are guardian angels in the world, and they don't always have wings. As they pulled into the driveway of Marcus's apartment complex, he found himself looking forward to his recovery period for the first time since the accident. Not because he was eager to avoid training, but because he was genuinely curious about what Jake might be able to teach him. The prospect of learning from someone with elite military training was appealing on multiple levels. His phone buzzed with a text message from Thompson. Rivera wants to apologize in person when you're up for it. Also, that Jake guy asked if he could start training at the gym. Told him absolutely. We could use someone like him around. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had managed since the incident. The idea of Jake becoming a regular presence at the Iron Forge gym was reassuring. Having someone around who could recognize and respond to emergency situations would make everyone safer, and the training opportunities could benefit the entire team. As he carefully climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, Marcus realized that while tonight had been one of the most frightening experiences of his life, it might also turn out to be one of the most significant. Meeting Jake and earning the opportunity to learn from someone with his background could change the entire trajectory of his fighting career. The sore throat and bruised windpipe would heal within a couple of weeks. The lessons he might learn from Jake could last a lifetime and potentially save his life again in the future. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the worst experiences led to the most valuable opportunities. Tonight might be proof of that principle. He settled into his favorite chair with a glass of ice water and the anti-inflammatory medication Dr. Chun had prescribed. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of physical recovery and mental adjustment to what had happened. In 2 weeks, if everything healed properly, he would begin a different kind of education under the guidance of a man who understood survival in ways that most people never would. For now, though, Marcus was simply grateful to be breathing normally and looking forward to tomorrow. After coming so close to having no future at all, the prospect of any future, even one that might include fewer fights and more caution, seemed like a gift worth appreciating. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood outside the Iron Forge gym, his hand resting unconsciously on his throat as he stared at the familiar entrance. The bruising had faded to a faint yellow-green that was barely visible, and Dr. Chun had cleared him for light training after his follow-up appointment that morning. But despite the medical clearance, Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach that had nothing to do with his physical condition. The automatic doors slid open as he approached, releasing the familiar combination of sounds and smells that had once felt like home. Now, those same sensory cues triggered a flood of memories from that night 2 weeks ago. The feeling of Rivera's arm around his neck, the panic of being unable to breathe, the gray edges creeping into his vision as consciousness began to slip away. "Marcus!" Thompson's voice boomed across the gym as soon as he spotted his student. The older coach abandoned the heavy bag he had been holding for another fighter and crossed the floor with obvious relief and pleasure. "Good to see you back, son. How are you feeling?" "Physically, I'm fine," Marcus replied, and his voice was indeed back to normal strength and clarity. "Mentally, that's a work in progress." Thompson nodded with understanding. In 30 years of training fighters, he had seen how close calls could affect different people in different ways. Some became more cautious and thoughtful, while others developed paralyzing anxiety that ended their careers. The key was helping each individual find their way back to confidence at their own pace. "Jake's been coming in every day since the incident," Thompson said, gesturing toward the corner where a small crowd had gathered around someone working on a heavy bag. "He's been asking about you, wanting to know when you'd be clear to train again." Marcus looked over and saw Jake's familiar figure, though he was moving differently than Marcus remembered from their brief encounters. Where Jake had previously seemed controlled and observant, but relatively relaxed, he was now demonstrating techniques with a fluid precision that spoke of years of serious combat training. His strikes against the heavy bag were crisp and economical, generating obvious power while maintaining perfect form and balance. A group of the gym's more experienced fighters had gathered to watch, and Marcus could see the respect and curiosity in their expressions. Word had obviously gotten around about Jake's background and his role in the incident, and the other fighters were clearly eager to learn from someone with his credentials. "He's been teaching some classes on situational awareness and emergency protocols," Thompson continued. "Basic stuff that probably should have been part of our training all along. How to recognize when sparring partners are in real distress, proper communication during grappling, what to do if someone gets seriously hurt." The idea that his near-death experience had led to improved safety protocols for everyone gave Marcus a sense that something positive had emerged from the trauma. He had always believed that experiences, even negative ones, should be learning opportunities rather than just sources of regret or fear. "Is Rivera here?" Marcus asked, scanning the gym for his sparring partner from that night. "Yeah, he's over by the grappling mats. He's been worried sick about you, Marcus. Keeps saying it was his fault, even though everyone knows it was just a freak accident." Thompson's expression grew more serious. "You might want to talk to him. He needs to hear from you that you don't blame him." Marcus nodded and made his way across the gym toward where Diego Rivera was working on Brazilian jiu-jitsu techniques with another fighter. As he approached, Rivera looked up and immediately stopped what he was doing, his face showing a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Marcus, man, I am so sorry," Rivera said immediately, standing up and extending his hand. "I keep thinking about what could have happened if that guy hadn't been there. I don't know how I missed your taps, how I didn't realize." "Diego, stop," Marcus interrupted, accepting the handshake and then pulling his training partner into a brief hug. "It wasn't your fault. The position was weird, you couldn't feel my taps clearly, and I couldn't speak. It was just one of those things that happen sometimes in training." Relief flooded Rivera's face, though Marcus could tell that the guilt would probably linger for a while longer. That was just the kind of person Rivera was, someone who took responsibility for his training partner's safety seriously and would be haunted by any incident where someone got hurt while working with him. "I've been working with Jake on better communication protocols during grappling," Rivera said. "Simple stuff like making sure there's always a way for someone to tap out clearly, positioning ourselves so coaches can see what's happening, verbal check-ins if someone seems to be struggling more than usual." The conversation was interrupted as Jake noticed Marcus's arrival and approached their group. He moved with the same economical precision Marcus remembered, but there was something more relaxed about his demeanor now that he had been training regularly for 2 weeks. The gym environment seemed to agree with him. "Good to see you back," Jake said, offering his hand. "How'd the doctor visit go?" "Clean bill of health," Marcus replied. "Cleared for light training, gradually working back up to full contact." Though to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about the full contact part yet. Jake nodded with understanding. That's normal. The important thing is not to rush it. Fear is a healthy response to trauma. It keeps you alive. The goal isn't to eliminate fear completely, but to manage it and learn from it. Thompson says you've been teaching some classes on safety protocols, Marcus said. Basic stuff, Jake replied modestly. Things that might help prevent accidents, or at least ensure faster response when they do happen. Would you be interested in some one-on-one training? Not fighting techniques necessarily, but awareness and survival skills that apply both in and out of the ring. The offer was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for, though he hadn't been sure how to bring it up. The prospect of learning from someone with Jake's background was appealing on multiple levels, not just for the technical knowledge, but for the psychological tools that might help him regain confidence in dangerous situations. I like that, Marcus said. When can we start? How about right now? We'll keep it simple and build from there. Jake led Marcus to a quiet corner of the gym where they would have space to work without interference from other training. The area was equipped with basic mats and some simple training equipment, but Jake seemed more interested in talking than in any physical activity. First thing to understand, Jake began, is that what happened to you wasn't a random accident. There were contributing factors that made it more likely, and understanding those factors can help prevent similar situations in the future. Marcus settled into a cross-legged position on the mat, ready to listen and learn. The analytical approach to the incident was appealing. It suggested that there were concrete steps he could take to regain a sense of control and safety. What kind of contributing factors? Communication breakdown, inadequate supervision, positioning that limited your ability to tap out effectively, lack of clear protocols for recognizing distress signals, Jake listed. None of those things individually would have caused a problem, but when they combined, they created a perfect storm. Jake began demonstrating different grappling positions and explaining how each one affected a person's ability to communicate distress. Some holds allowed for clear tapping with either hand. Others made it difficult to reach the opponent's body, and still others could interfere with verbal communication. The key is awareness. Jake explained as he showed Marcus how subtle changes in positioning could make the difference between a safe training drill and a potentially dangerous situation. Both partners need to understand what's happening and maintain communication throughout the exchange. They spent the next hour working through various scenarios, with Jake teaching Marcus to recognize early warning signs of dangerous positions and to communicate more effectively during grappling exchanges. The work was methodical and thoughtful, focusing on understanding and prevention rather than just technique. Now let's talk about the psychological side, Jake said as they took a break. You mentioned that you're nervous about full contact training. That's a normal response, but it's something we can work on. Marcus appreciated Jake's direct approach to what had been a source of private anxiety. Most people either avoided the subject entirely or offered generic reassurances that didn't address the real psychological impact of the trauma. It's not just the fear of getting hurt again, Marcus admitted. It's the memory of being completely helpless. In all my years of sports, I've never experienced anything like that feeling of being unable to do anything to help myself. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Helplessness is one of the most traumatic psychological states a person can experience. It goes against every survival instinct we have. The good news is that it's something that can be addressed through proper training and gradual exposure. What do you mean by gradual exposure? We start with situations where you have complete control and gradually introduce elements that challenge your comfort zone, but always in a controlled way where you can stop or adjust as needed, Jake explained. The goal is to rebuild confidence in your ability to handle dangerous situations. They began with simple breathing exercises designed to help Marcus remain calm in stressful situations. Jake taught him techniques used by military personnel to maintain clear thinking and effective performance under extreme pressure. The methods were surprisingly simple, but required consistent practice to become automatic responses. Breathing is the foundation of everything, Jake said as he guided Marcus through a tactical breathing pattern. When you control your breathing, you control your stress response. When you control your stress response, you can think clearly and make good decisions. The breathing work led naturally into discussion of situational awareness, the ability to recognize and assess potential dangers before they became immediate threats. Jake explained how SEALs were trained to constantly evaluate their environment for both opportunities and risks, maintaining a state of relaxed alertness that allowed for quick response without constant anxiety. It's not about being paranoid, Jake clarified. It's about being prepared. There's a big difference between healthy caution and debilitating fear. As their training session continued, Marcus found himself feeling more relaxed and confident than he had since the incident. Jake's approach was practical and empowering, focusing on skills and knowledge rather than trying to minimize or dismiss the very real trauma Marcus had experienced. Other fighters in the gym occasionally stopped to watch their training, curious about the techniques Jake was demonstrating. Word was spreading that Jake was teaching things that went well beyond traditional martial arts, and there was growing interest in learning from someone with his background and experience. "Could I ask you something personal?" Marcus said during another break. "Sure. What made you decide to start training here? I mean, you obviously have skills that go way beyond what most of us are working on. What do you get out of working with civilian fighters?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Transition to civilian life isn't always easy for military personnel, especially those coming out of special operations. You spend years in an environment where your skills and training are essential for survival, and then suddenly you're in a world where those same skills aren't needed or valued in the same way. He gestured around the gym. "This place reminds me of the positive aspects of military training. People pushing themselves to be better, working together toward common goals, maintaining physical and mental discipline. It's a way to stay connected to those values without the operational stress." Marcus nodded, understanding that Jake was sharing something relatively personal and significant. The idea that someone with elite military training would find value in a civilian gym environment spoke to the fundamental human need for challenge and community that transcended specific career fields. Plus, Jake continued with a slight smile, "It's nice to use my skills to help people rather than—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but Marcus could fill in the blanks based on Jake's military background. Their conversation was interrupted by Thompson's approach. The coach had been observing their training session from a distance and was obviously pleased with what he saw. "Looks like good work," Thompson said. "Marcus, how are you feeling about everything?" "Better," Marcus replied honestly. "Jake's teaching me things I never would have learned otherwise. Stuff that makes me feel more prepared and less vulnerable." Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Jake, I've been thinking about what you said regarding safety protocols. Would you be interested in teaching a formal class for all our fighters? Basic emergency response, situational awareness, that kind of thing." Jake considered the offer. "I could do that. Maybe one evening a week, focused on practical skills that everyone could use both in training and in daily life." "Excellent. I'll set it up and make sure everyone knows about it. This kind of training should have been part of our program from the beginning." As Thompson walked away to make arrangements, Marcus realized that his accident was turning into something much more significant than just a personal trauma. It was becoming a catalyst for improving safety and training standards throughout the gym, potentially preventing similar incidents for dozens of other fighters. "One more thing," Jake said as they prepared to wrap up their first training session. "I want you to understand that recovering from trauma isn't about returning to exactly where you were before. It's about becoming stronger and wiser because of the experience." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of hope that had been missing for the past 2 weeks. The prospect of becoming not just as good as he was before the accident, but actually better because of what he had learned from it, was powerfully motivating. "When do we train again?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow, if you're up for it. We'll start working on some light grappling drills, focus on communication and positioning. Take it slow and build from there." As Marcus left the gym that evening, he felt genuinely optimistic about his future in martial arts for the first time since the incident. The combination of Jake's expertise, his own renewed commitment to safety and awareness, and the improved protocols being implemented throughout the gym created an environment where he could continue pursuing his goals while minimizing the risks that had nearly cost him his life. The road back to full competition might be longer and more careful than his original path had been, but Marcus was beginning to believe it might also be more sustainable and ultimately more successful. Sometimes, he reflected, the most valuable lessons came from the most frightening experiences, and the best teachers appeared exactly when they were needed most. 3 months after the incident, Marcus stood at the entrance to the Michigan State Athletic Commission building, holding a manila envelope containing his application to renew his amateur fighting license. The building was a modest 2-story structure in downtown Lansing that served as headquarters for regulating combat sports throughout the state. Today would determine whether his career as a mixed martial artist would continue or end. The hearing was standard procedure for any fighter who had experienced a significant training injury. The commission wanted to ensure that Marcus was fully recovered, both physically and mentally, before clearing him to compete again. What made this hearing unusual was the comprehensive documentation Jake had helped him prepare over the past months of training. "You ready for this?" Jake asked as they walked toward the entrance together. He had driven up from Detroit to serve as Marcus's advocate and to present the safety protocols they had developed during their months of working together. "As ready as I can be," Marcus replied, though butterflies danced in his stomach. The commission had the power to permanently revoke his license if they determined that his injury posed ongoing risks to himself or other fighters. Everything he had worked toward over the past 3 months could be decided in the next 2 hours. Inside the building, they were directed to a conference room where 3 commission members sat behind a long table. Dr. Patricia Vance, the commission's chief medical officer, was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who had been evaluating fighter safety for over 20 years. Commissioner Robert Hayes was a former professional boxer whose scarred face spoke of his own experiences with the dangers of combat sports. The third member, Commissioner Janet Morrison, was a lawyer who specialized in athletic regulation and liability issues. "Mr. Williams," Dr. Vance began, consulting the file in front of her, "we've reviewed your medical records from the incident 3 months ago, as well as your follow-up examinations. From a purely physical standpoint, you appear to have made a complete recovery. Our concern today is whether you've adequately addressed the circumstances that led to the injury in the first place." Marcus had prepared for this moment extensively with Jake's guidance. Instead of simply arguing that he was ready to fight again, they had developed a comprehensive presentation demonstrating how the incident had led to improved safety protocols and enhanced training methods. "Commissioners," Marcus began, "I'd like to present not just my personal recovery, but the systematic changes we've implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future." He gestured to Jake, who stepped forward with a confident professionalism that immediately commanded the room's attention. Even in civilian clothes, Jake carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes briefings and life-or-death decision-making. "Commissioners, my name is Jake Mitchell. I'm a former Navy SEAL who witnessed and intervened in Mr. Williams' training incident. I've spent the past 3 months working with him and his training team to develop enhanced safety protocols based on military emergency response procedures." Jake's credentials clearly impressed the commission members. Commissioner Hayes leaned forward with obvious interest, while Dr. Vance made notes on her tablet. The military connection lent credibility to their presentation that civilian expertise alone might not have provided. The incident that injured Mr. Williams was caused by a convergence of preventable factors, Jake continued, activating a laptop connected to a projector screen. Poor positioning that limited communication options, inadequate supervision angles for coaching staff, and lack of standardized distress recognition protocols. The presentation was methodical and professional, breaking down the incident into component factors and demonstrating specific solutions for each problem area. Jake showed video footage of training drills that emphasized clear communication, proper positioning for safety, and improved supervision techniques for coaching staff. These protocols are now being implemented not just for Mr. Williams, but for all fighters training at Iron Forge Gym, Jake explained. We've also developed a comprehensive emergency response training program that has been adopted by 3 other gyms in the Detroit area. Commissioner Morrison looked up from her notes with obvious interest. Are you saying that Mr. Williams's injury has led to widespread improvements in training safety standards? Exactly, Jay confirmed. Sometimes negative events can become catalysts for positive change when they're properly analyzed and addressed. Mr. Williams's willingness to examine what went wrong and work toward solutions has potentially prevented similar injuries for dozens of other fighters. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched Jake present their work to the commission. What had begun as personal trauma and recovery had evolved into something much larger, a systematic approach to fighter safety that was already being adopted by other training facilities. Dr. Vance asked several technical questions about the specific medical aspects of Marcus's injury and recovery. She was particularly interested in the psychological evaluation that Dr. Rebecca Santos, a sports psychologist specializing in combat athletics, had conducted as part of Marcus's rehabilitation. Dr. Santos's report indicates that you've not only recovered from the initial trauma, but have actually developed enhanced stress management and situational awareness skills, Dr. Vance noted. Can you elaborate on that assessment? Marcus had prepared extensively for this question with Dr. Santos's guidance. The incident taught me that confidence without awareness is dangerous, he replied. Through my work with Jake, I've learned to recognize and respond to potential problems before they become emergencies. I'm actually more prepared for dangerous situations now than I was before the injury. To demonstrate this claim, Jake had prepared a series of video examples showing Marcus's improved performance in high-stress training scenarios. The footage showed him maintaining clear communication during complex grappling exchanges, recognizing and responding to potentially dangerous positions, and helping training partners with their own safety awareness. We've also implemented a buddy system approach to training, Marcus explained. Every sparring session includes designated safety observers whose only job is to watch for signs of distress or dangerous positioning. It's based on military small unit tactics, where team members are responsible for each other's well-being. Commissioner Hayes, the former boxer, asked about Marcus's competitive goals and timeline for returning to active fighting. This was the question Marcus had been most concerned about, because his answer required acknowledging that his priorities had shifted significantly since the incident. My immediate goal isn't to rush back into competition, Marcus said honestly. I want to continue developing as a fighter, but with the enhanced safety awareness and protocols we've established. I'd rather have a longer career with better preparation than risk another serious injury by cutting corners. The commission members exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the maturity of Marcus's response. Too many young fighters were eager to return to competition as quickly as possible, often before they had fully processed the lessons their injuries could teach them. Jake concluded their presentation with a detailed overview of the ongoing training program he had developed specifically for Marcus. The curriculum included advanced situational awareness, stress management under pressure, emergency communication protocols, and what he called tactical athletics, applying military small unit tactics to civilian sports training. Mr. Williams has not just recovered from his injury, Jake stated. He has used the experience to become a safer, more aware, and more complete fighter. The protocols we've developed together are now being taught to other athletes specifically because they work. After their presentation concluded, the commission excused Marcus and Jake to deliberate in private. The waiting period felt endless, though it lasted only 20 minutes. Marcus paced nervously in the hallway outside the conference room, while Jake remained calmly seated, projecting the kind of steady confidence that came from extensive experience in high-pressure situations. Whatever they decide, Jake said quietly, you should be proud of the work you've done these past few months. Recovery isn't just about getting back to where you were. It's about becoming better because of what you've learned. When the commission called them back into the room, Dr. Vance was smiling slightly, which Marcus hoped was a positive sign. Commissioner Hayes shuffled through some papers before looking up with an expression that revealed nothing about their decision. Mr. Williams, Dr. Vance began, this commission has reviewed thousands of injury cases over the years, and I can honestly say that your approach to recovery and safety improvement is among the most impressive we've encountered. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he waited for the actual decision. Positive comments could be a precursor to either approval or sympathetic rejection. Your amateur fighting license is hereby renewed with full authorization for competition, Commissioner Morrison announced. Additionally, we would like to discuss the possibility of adopting your safety protocols as recommended standard for training facilities throughout the state. Relief flooded through Marcus so powerfully that he had to sit down. 3 months of intensive preparation and personal growth had led to this moment of validation and approval. But even more significant was the Commission's interest in spreading their safety innovations to other fighters and gyms. We're very interested in that possibility, Jake replied for both of them. The goal was never just to help Marcus recover, but to prevent similar injuries for other athletes. If these protocols can save even one fighter from experiencing what Marcus went through, the effort will have been worthwhile. Commissioner Hayes stood up and extended his hand to Marcus. Young man, you've turned a potentially career-ending injury into an opportunity to improve safety for fighters throughout the state. That takes character and intelligence that goes well beyond athletic ability. As they left the building, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment that was different from anything he had experienced in sports competition. This wasn't about defeating an opponent or winning a match. It was about overcoming personal trauma and creating something valuable for the broader fighting community. So what's next? Jake asked as they walked toward the parking lot. I guess it's time to start planning my return to competition, Marcus replied. But I want to do it right. Gradual progression, careful opponent selection, emphasis on safety and technique over just winning. Sounds like a solid plan. And the Commission's interest in the safety protocols. Marcus thought about the implications of having their training methods adopted statewide. It could potentially impact hundreds of fighters and prevent numerous injuries, creating a lasting legacy that extended far beyond his individual career. I think we should pursue it, Marcus said. If we can help other fighters avoid what happened to me, that might be more important than anything I accomplish in competition. Jake nodded approvingly. Sometimes the most significant victories happen outside the ring. As they drove back toward Detroit, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his perspective had changed over the past 3 months. What had initially seemed like the worst thing that could happen to his fighting career had ultimately become the foundation for something much more meaningful and substantial. The incident had introduced him to Jake, whose mentorship had provided not just technical training, but a completely different approach to personal development and goal achievement. The safety protocols they had developed were already helping other fighters train more safely and effectively. And the psychological growth Marcus had experienced through confronting and overcoming his trauma had made him stronger and more resilient in all areas of his life. His phone buzzed with a text message from Thompson. How'd it go? The whole gym is waiting to hear. Marcus smiled as he typed back. License renewed, and the State Commission wants to adopt our safety protocols for all gyms. The response came back immediately. Congratulations. When can you start sparring again? Marcus looked over at Jake, who was driving with the same calm competence he brought to everything he did. Soon, Marcus replied. But we're going to do it right. The road ahead would likely include more challenges and setbacks, but Marcus felt prepared for them in ways he never had before. The combination of enhanced technical skills, improved safety awareness, psychological resilience, and the ongoing mentorship of someone with Jake's background created a foundation for long-term success that went well beyond just winning fights. Sometimes, Marcus had learned, the most valuable opportunities came disguised as disasters. The key was having the wisdom to recognize them and the courage to do the hard work necessary to transform trauma into growth. With Jake's continued guidance and the Commission's endorsement of their methods, Marcus was ready to begin the next chapter of both his fighting career and his personal development. 6 months later, the Iron Forge gym was buzzing with an energy that Marcus had never experienced before. The main training area had been expanded to accommodate the growing number of fighters who wanted to train under the safety protocols that had emerged from Marcus's near-death experience. Local news crews were setting up cameras in one corner of the facility, preparing to document what had become known as the Michigan model of fighter safety training. Marcus adjusted his new coaching polo shirt, still feeling slightly strange about his transition from student to instructor. At 23, he was younger than many of the fighters he was now helping to train, but his unique experience and the comprehensive education he had received from Jake had qualified him for a role he never could have imagined a year ago. Nervous about the interview? Jake asked, approaching with his characteristic calm confidence. In the months since Marcus's commission hearing, Jake had become the gym's official safety coordinator, a newly created position that reflected the facility's commitment to the protocols they had developed together. A little, Marcus admitted. It's weird being the face of something that started with me almost dying. You earned this recognition, Jake replied firmly. What happened to you was traumatic, but what you've done with that experience is remarkable. The program we've built here is saving lives. The statement wasn't hyperbole. In the 6 months since the Michigan Athletic Commission had endorsed their safety protocols, 17 training facilities across the state had adopted similar programs. 3 potential serious injuries had been prevented by coaches who had learned to recognize the warning signs Marcus had identified, and emergency response times had improved dramatically at gyms that had implemented their communication systems. Thompson approached them with a broad smile, carrying a folder filled with documentation of their program's success. The reporter from Channel 7 wants to start with some background on the original incident, then move into the current program. Marcus, they want you to demonstrate some of the communication drills with Rivera. The idea of recreating elements of that traumatic night, even in a controlled and educational context, still made Marcus slightly nervous. But he had worked extensively with Dr. Santos to process those feelings, and he understood that sharing his experience was essential for helping other fighters avoid similar trauma. Diego Rivera emerged from the locker room, now wearing a coaching shirt identical to Marcus's. The two men had developed a strong friendship and working partnership in the months following the incident, bonded by their shared experience and commitment to preventing similar accidents. Rivera had thrown himself into learning the safety protocols with the same intensity he had once reserved for competition preparation. Ready to show them how it's done? Rivera asked with a grin. Despite the serious nature of their work, both men had maintained the camaraderie and competitive spirit that had drawn them to martial arts in the first place. The news crew finished their setup, and reporter Sarah Chun, coincidentally sharing a surname with the emergency room doctor who had treated Marcus, approached with her microphone and camera operator. She was an experienced sports journalist who had covered combat athletics for over a decade, and she understood both the technical and human elements of the story she was telling. Marcus, let's start with what happened that night 6 months ago, Sarah began. Can you walk us through the incident that almost ended your fighting career? Marcus had told this story dozens of times to various audiences, but he still felt a slight tightness in his chest as he recalled those terrifying moments of being unable to breathe. Diego and I were sparring, working on grappling techniques. He got me in what should have been a standard submission hold, but the positioning went wrong. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't tap out effectively. The camera captured Rivera's expression as Marcus spoke, showing the genuine emotion that still crossed his face when discussing his role in the incident. I couldn't tell that anything was wrong, Rivera added. From my perspective, it looked like normal training. I was focused on maintaining the technique, not realizing that Marcus was actually in danger. What changed the outcome? Sarah asked, though she clearly already knew the answer from her research. Marcus gestured toward Jake, who stood slightly apart from the group with his characteristic professional reserve. Jake Mitchell, a former Navy SEAL who happened to be visiting the gym that night. He recognized immediately that something was wrong when everyone else thought it was just normal sparring. Jake stepped forward reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of media attention. "The important thing isn't what I did that night," he said. "It's what Marcus and Diego and the whole team here have done since then to make sure it doesn't happen to other fighters." Sarah turned her attention to the broader implications of the incident. "I understand that your personal experience has led to statewide changes in training protocols. Can you explain how that developed?" Marcus gestured toward the training area, where several pairs of fighters were working through drills that incorporated the safety protocols they had developed. "We realized that the incident happened because of preventable communication and supervision failures. So we spent months developing better systems for recognizing distress, improving positioning for safety, and training coaches to spot problems before they become emergencies." The camera followed Marcus and Rivera as they demonstrated the communication techniques that had emerged from their analysis of the original incident. They showed how subtle changes in positioning could maintain the effectiveness of training drills while ensuring that both partners could communicate clearly throughout the exercise. "The buddy system approach comes from military small unit tactics," Jake explained as the camera captured fighters working in teams of 3, 2 active participants, and 1 dedicated safety observer. "In combat situations, team members are responsible for each other's well-being. We've adapted that concept for civilian athletics." Sarah interviewed several other fighters who had trained under the new protocols, getting their perspectives on how the safety measures had affected their training and confidence. The responses were universally positive, with fighters reporting that they felt more secure and could therefore train more aggressively within appropriate boundaries. "Has there been any resistance to implementing these additional safety measures?" Sarah asked Thompson. "Initially, some old-school fighters worried that it would make training too cautious or interfere with the development of mental toughness," Thompson replied honestly. "But the opposite has proven true. When fighters know they're training safely, they're willing to push themselves harder and take more calculated risks." The news crew filmed training sessions for over an hour, capturing the seamless integration of safety protocols into high-intensity martial arts training. The footage would clearly demonstrate that enhanced safety didn't require sacrificing the intensity or effectiveness that made combat sport attractive to serious athletes. Dr. Rebecca Santos arrived midway through filming to provide the psychological perspective on Marcus's recovery and the broader implications of trauma-informed training approaches. Her research on post-traumatic growth in athletes had gained national attention, largely due to Marcus's case study. Marcus's experience represents what we call post-traumatic growth, Dr. Santos explained to the camera. Rather than simply returning to his pre-incident baseline, he has developed enhanced capabilities and awareness that make him actually stronger than he was before the trauma occurred. The psychological component of the story was particularly important because it challenged common assumptions about career-threatening injuries. Instead of viewing such incidents as purely negative events that athletes must overcome, the Michigan model demonstrated how they could become catalysts for significant positive development. As the filming concluded, Sarah conducted final interviews with the key participants. Her questions focused on the future implications of their work and its potential for adoption beyond Michigan's borders. "We've had inquiries from athletic commissions in 12 other states," Marcus revealed. "The UFC has also expressed interest in incorporating some of our protocols into their training standards for fighters preparing for professional competition." The prospect of their safety innovations reaching the highest levels of professional mixed martial arts was exciting, but also somewhat overwhelming. What had begun as a personal recovery project was evolving into something with national significance for combat sports safety. Jake was characteristically modest about his role in the program's success. "The real credit belongs to Marcus and Diego and everyone here who is willing to examine a traumatic incident honestly and work toward solutions. My contribution was just applying some military training principles to civilian athletics." After the news crew packed up their equipment, the gym returned to its normal training rhythm. But there was an underlying sense of pride and accomplishment that came from knowing their work was being recognized and adopted by others in the fighting community. Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point as he watched new students learning the safety protocols that had emerged from his trauma. A year ago, he had been a struggling amateur fighter with limited prospects and questionable technique. Today, he was a certified instructor whose methods were being studied and implemented across the country. His fighting career had also resumed, though with a more measured and strategic approach than he might have taken before the incident. He had won his first 3 amateur bouts since returning to competition, each victory demonstrating the enhanced mental preparation and situational awareness that had emerged from his work with Jake. Any regrets about how everything turned out? Rivera asked as they finished cleaning up after the filming session. Marcus considered the question seriously. The incident had been genuinely traumatic, and there were still occasional moments when he felt anxiety about grappling situations that reminded him of that night. But the growth and opportunities that had emerged from the experience far outweighed the negative aspects. No regrets, Marcus said finally. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I can't argue with the results. I'm a better fighter, a better coach, and probably a better person than I was before it happened. Jake overheard the conversation and nodded approvingly. That's